Good evening, everyone. Tonight is the last of our budget workshops, February 24th, 6 p.m. And tonight, the one and only item on our agenda is the Board of Education. So I will have Mary Ann give us the breakdown.
Okay, so I know I presented on the 9th, and this is kind of a new process. I used to present, and then we would talk about it. So in this case, you guys got the budget book, my presentation, you heard the overview, and a lot of detail in there. So really, I think, new for me, but tonight is to answer any questions you have, clarify anything, give some context to any of the requests. And I don't know if we're doing both related to operating and capital at all, Carl. I had turned that over, and I know Tuesday night he talked about our capital budget and some recommendations to look at some end-of-year funding for some sources, and then some current accounts, and I know he explained that Tuesday night. So I'm here to answer questions or clarify anything I can for each of you. I would like to take a second and thank, I have a number of administrators here with me and a number of board members. So Catherine Staunton, Jack Sherbin, Jason Adler, Alan Samet, and my Board of Education Chair, Erica Gelvin, are all here as well tonight. So I'd like to thank them for all their support. Did I miss someone over there?
Yeah, as a first.
Yeah, I did Catherine first. I caught her there in between. And you know, this is like you. This is a long process where all of our administrators presented. Our board had subcommittee workshops, and you know, they're here tonight. I appreciate that support. I think we've worked hard on this budget and brought something that we feel kind of supports what those unique needs are this year as we come out of the pandemic, and also project us into the future, but are doing that in as fiscally conservative a way as we can. So thank you to all of them, and I wanted to acknowledge their presence here tonight. So I'm happy to answer anything I can, clarify, represent, or talk about anything in our budget.
You want to just go through quickly what we reviewed before? Would that be good for everybody?
Sure.
Or do you want to just, anybody have any questions? Why don't you give a brief overview of everything?
Sure.
That's probably the simplest way, then if anybody has any
So
questions
if
on
you
that.
have your budget book, let's go to the request by object tab, I think. And that's page 17. This gives you a narrative of each of our object categories and what's causing any increase or decrease. And that's in there, but I think on page 21 is the broad overview of our budget. And then the detail is on those pages previous, but that I'll just speak to it briefly. So in our object, as you can see, the far right column is the percent of the total budget. So you can see very quickly that our certified salaries, our non-certified salaries, and our employee benefits make up 78.89% of our budget. So we are a people-driven business. The critical nature of what we do for children is that connection between our teachers and our support staff in the classroom, and advancing students' learning and supporting them as they move through our school system. So that is the largest component of our budget, and mainly in our employee benefits line, we've been able to hold the line a little bit in some of our health insurance costs, as well as a contribution to our pension. We have about $100,000 reduction in what we need to contribute this year, mostly because the markets were really great last year, and some of the management of our pension fund over time by People's Bank. So that has helped to offset increases and keep our salary and benefits subtotal increase to that 1.37% of the budget. And then the remainder really are all of the different object lines. You can see we have some that are increasing a little bit, some that are decreasing a little bit. I guess I would highlight for you the liability property insurance, which is midway down that column. As Carl has talked about, that increase is primarily due to market conditions, but that cybersecurity piece is part of what's driving that much larger increase this year. Also, as you move down a couple lines further, you see our tuition line. That sometimes is not clear to people. That tuition line represents any students who choose to attend either a magnet school, and we have an association with New Haven where our students attend tuition free, but then there are some additional magnet schools in New Haven and in the surrounding areas. There's one in London, the Marine Science Magnet, that students can choose to attend. In addition, if they choose to attend a vocational, a VOAG school, vocational agricultural school, there's one in Middletown, we are required as a district to pay some tuition for those students to contribute to their education. So that tuition line includes those students, and we're projecting 2 additional students going. And there is a breakdown in the back of this of how many, on page 51, of how many students actually are attending, and we're projecting 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 12 students that we have to pay tuition for, 10. And then you'll notice in that list on page 51, Vinyl Tech and Grasso Tech, the students who are attending there, we don't pay tuition for because we don't have to pay for students to attend the technical schools, but any magnet or VOAG school. And then the rest of that line represents other out-of-district tuitions for specialized programming for students who have certain needs that we cannot meet in the district. We need to provide that free and appropriate public education. That's done through a PPT process, a parent and placement team meeting process, and it's particular to students who have really unique needs. And you can see that we have that layout. So this is a line that is a driver of our budget. And you're seeing that we have a 7.72% increase. It's just over $100,000. Last year we were down about $100,000, and this is a line that's really hard to budget for. We budget for what we know and anticipate will happen in the fall, but a student may move out. We may have a student move in who might be in an out-of-district placement, but if their parents reside in Clinton, then we're responsible for the cost. So it changes throughout the year constantly, but this is our best estimate. You can see it's almost 5% of our budget, and it is a driver. We work hard to provide really good programming in district to meet students' needs. We've created some specialized programs to keep these costs down over the years, but this is one that you can see there's a significant increase that's contributing. And then the others are smaller lines, a little bit up, a little bit down. As I shared in my presentation, really the story of this budget is around recovery. It's around staff and students, and then some curriculum initiatives that we need to put in place for our students to continue to grow. And really that's the bulk of where our focus is. We've really been able to maintain and contain a lot of these line items. This year we've leveraged some grant funding that we got through the federal government to meet needs of students that might be more than what we would have seen in pandemic, and that's helped to keep this where it is. So I'm proud of the work my administrators did to really look at line items and trim where we could and then invest where we need to. So we're looking at that 1.89% increase in operating, and that's pretty well represented here. Behind it on the request by cost center shows you each school and each line item and where there are increases. But those are also referenced in this description on page 17 to 20. So you can kind of get the overview and then go into specific budgets if you needed to see the line item.
You want to just talk to the whole enrollment thing, because everybody always has that question.
Sure.
So,
yeah, I am happy to talk about enrollment. So we have a tab on enrollment and staffing. It's actually page 7 of the booklet. And I do get the question every year, how do we approach enrollment and declining enrollment? This has not been a secret in my tenure. It hasn't been a secret for the board. It's a continual conversation. So in our budget book every year that I've been here, we include projected enrollment. On an annual basis, we have the New England School Development Council, or NESDEC, update our projected enrollment. They look at live births, they do their statistical analyses to project forward, and we base our staffing and our decision making on these projected enrollments for not just next year, but we look forward. And we have been, since I've come into the position in 2016, and even prior, we've been experiencing declining enrollment. So each year, our favorite question is, are we staffed appropriately? And we look at that through all of our departments. And what are, we've had discussion at the board level, what are the appropriate class sizes? What are the appropriate programs that we want to make sure we maintain? How do we look at the short term and long term? And we made one big move in 2019. The culminating piece as we opened 2019 was we closed Pearson School. And the board did a study for several years, worked with our community on making those decisions, and we reorganized our district, closed Pearson and moved 5th grade to Joel, or 5th grade to Elliott and 4th grade to Joel. That year, we did a number of staff reductions at that point, and in this section, if you go to page 10, it shows you all of our staffing. So again, to kind of answer those questions where people are like, I heard, or I saw, or you haven't, this is it. This goes from 2017-18 and to this year, where we landed actually and what we're projecting for next year. So FTE is full-time equivalent. It tells you how many people exist. So for a teacher, they teach 5 periods a day, they're considered 1, right? A part-time para-educator or a part-time secretary might be represented by 0.6 or 0.8. So 1 means a full-time employee. And so you can track and see what that has looked like and what we're proposing. Going into next year, we are proposing that we maintain our staff. So 2 years ago, I would have told you this is the year we might have been restructuring a little bit at Elliott with our teams and potentially looking at some staff reductions. Where we are now in this pandemic, what we've learned in terms of spacing in our classrooms and still dealing with this, with recovery and our students' needs for individualized instruction, that's a conversation we had at the board level in our subcommittee. And the proposal is to maintain that staffing going into next year. We have 2 initiatives to take a look at our scheduling at the middle school and high school, to look at our programs. We're in strategic planning to kind of plan forward. What are those critical pieces that we want to maintain in our district so that we can plan thoughtfully and creatively about our staffing choices. Certification comes into play, experience comes into play. So there's a lot of factors to do this the right way, and that's where we are. So the board has supported the recommendation to move forward with our staffing where it is, but again, the detail is there. And I'm going to bring you back to page 9, because page 9 kind of shows you where we're going to be with our class sizes. And again, it's hard to judge completely. The elementary and the middle school, the top chart is pretty solid with where our class sizes are and where we expect to be next year. The high school represents the enrollment this year and this year's class sizes. And the high school represents that because we haven't scheduled yet for next year. We don't know exactly what courses kids are taking, and we can't average it. So we show you the current year, but the high school is projected at basically the same number as next year. It will decline after that, but next year it's projected to be the same size. So this is what we put out to you. This is what the board looks at and analyzes. This is what we've talked about. And we were able to propose this budget, maintain what we feel is critically important for our students at this point in time. But we are looking to the future, and we ask that question every year, and we look for the restructuring. I believe that data kind of shows that we've done that prudently along the way, and we've gotten stronger. Some districts have to make cuts, and there are times here we've had to make some cuts quicker than we wanted to. In the time that I've been superintendent, we've been able to have support from the community for a budget that has prevented us from having to be reactive and has let us plan forward. And even in planning forward, though, we have made those adjustments and reductions where it was appropriate in staffing. And I think those tables kind of help to represent that, but I'm happy to chat more about it for anyone who wants to. This budget, though, represents kind of maintaining staff where we are. And any additional staff we felt we needed for pandemic recovery, we have relied on grants to fund that so that we're not adding to this baseline operating budget. Don't know if I answered that adequately,
Yep, no. It was
yeah, no, it's a legitimate question, and we ask ourselves that every year. Administrators do, we do, and then we do at the board level as well before we make decisions.
Any other topics you wanted to cover?
I've always been taken with the transportation aspect, and I know that it's state mandated and there's not a great deal you can do about it. And I've always been interested in whether somebody at the state shouldn't question whether a small town of 13,000 should be treated in the same way as a town of 250,000. It's extremely expensive. And after COVID, and before COVID, very few people were on the buses. And for every reason, to watch those buses go by empty is disturbing. But what's amazing to me tonight is to see the transportation costs for the special needs schools.
For out of district, yeah.
That's amazing, $45,000 a year for one child.
Yes.
And there's nothing that can be done about that.
So what we do with, so there's a couple things. In regular transportation, every 5 years, we've been going out to bid since 2009-10. When the contract ended, we go out to bid. What we find is there's basically 3 providers in the state. We work with M&J. They won the new contract, and we're going into our last year with them, so we'll go out to bid again. But prior to that, we were with First Student, and prior to that, it was M&J. So we have gone back and forth based on the bid results. The last time we went out to bid, we looked at the cost per bus per day. And we actually had a lower, I was shocked, but a much lower cost per bus per day from M&J than some other districts had with M&J. And I think that was partly because the board, prior to my tenure, had made a decision to go out to bid, and a lot of local towns, when you build those relationships, it's hard to switch companies. So we have contained those costs, but what we've done in the last 3 years, and I can give you specifics of how many buses each year, when we redistricted, clearly we saved money in that contract. And then in the last 2 years, partly because of drivers, partly because fewer kids are riding, but we have to provide the capacity, and we saw that our numbers of bus riders did increase as the year went on last year. A lot started not and then did. But we are obligated to provide transportation within our policy, which is beyond certain limits. But we really looked at the routes, and we've been able to reduce at least 4, maybe 5 buses in the last 2 years. So this budget actually represents a reduction again in the number of buses. And what we hadn't done going into this year was predict that we would be able to reduce again, and yet we were. So we reduced a midday bus and a full bus this year, and now we're projecting another bus reduction next year. And so that nets us somewhere around $45,000 with the bus reduction, and then a little bit of savings in fuel costs. So locally, I think we've worked hard to kind of consolidate routes and really get a feel of ridership. I will say the high school buses, it depends on the bus you see, because we have some elementary ones. I have an administrator out there that are packed, depending on where kids live and where the routes are. Our high school buses in the afternoon are often more empty because kids are participating after school, and they're a little thinner probably. But some days kids ride them, some days they don't. So we have to manage all of that. But we work on it, and I do think we've done a lot, if you look at the trending there, to try and contain it. But it's a challenge, and it is something we talk about. How do we do this, and how do we tighten it? Because as you noted, our transportation is, it makes up 5% of the budget. So just like the tuition, it's a driver of our budget. So this year we're fortunate in that it's only going up $5,000 despite the contract increase of 3%. And despite the increase on the special ed transportation side for out of district, that's going up about 100, and then the other one's coming down about 100, and so we're able to really almost flat fund despite it. When it comes to the out of district students, it really depends on where their program is, and we will coordinate transportation. So we work with our surrounding districts. They may have a student going to the same out of district placement, and if we can share transportation, we do. We don't usually send big buses. Sometimes they're smaller vans. Sometimes that cost also includes an aide that needs to drive with the student depending on the student's needs. So we look to do that. There's actually some statewide and regional efforts to create a software database that allows you to see school districts and where they're going to see if we can collaborate regionally. That's an initiative that started to get underway in the pandemic, and I think it's settled, but we all know these are the drivers, and we work on it. The numbers are a little variable. Depends on the distance, depends on the student, if they can share transportation with another student safely, if they need a person to ride with them, and that's part of what drives up those costs.
It's good that you pay such close attention to it. That's great.
We do. I can tell you my administrators really do. We know what the drivers are. It's hard to control those costs, but we do spend time on it. And I think, looking at regional solutions as much as we can is something we try to do, but are a lot of constraints that prevent us from doing that, but as superintendents, we're really pushing those conversations because we're not alone in declining enrollment. Everybody around us in the shoreline are actually facing those same challenges, so we're trying to get creative in how we can do that better.
Anybody else? If not, then I guess we are good. All set? All right.
At any point, if you have questions, you can, let Carl and Chris know, or send them to Erica or myself, and we're happy to get you information if you need that for decision making or clarification. And I appreciate your time. I know this isn't easy work, and good luck, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
All right, thanks.
All right, pretty good? All right, we'll be back at it next week to discuss everything. Thank you again, everyone.